it's you.
Hello, my name is Julia Stanislav, and I am a worker here in the archives. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending this evening's program. The Dole Institute provides many opportunities for students, like the Student Advisory Board, which is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. They attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, and plan an SIB-sponsored event every semester. Members of the SIB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoy this evening's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. To view past programs, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. A video of tonight's presentation will be available on our website soon. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student helper with a microphone, I will be one of them, so look for me, and please just ask one brief question. Finally, if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers here in the hall and they can assist you. And now, please welcome Director of the Dole Institute, Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thanks to all of you for coming out. We're delighted to have you here. I want to tell you about a program that will occur here Sunday afternoon. We'll have Al Fromm, who is the creator and the leader of the Democratic Leadership Council. He'll be talking about the huge turnaround that occurred in presidential politics from 1988 to 1992, and it will be a fascinating program. So if you're interested in that subject, definitely come by, 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. The Dole Institute Archive is an extraordinary place. Virtually every significant legislative achievement of the second half of the 20th century can be researched here. The depth of Senator Dole's involvement in these achievements still even amazes me after working for him for 28 years. And most citizens, even in Kansas, are not aware that to this day he remains the longest running Republican leader in the history of the United States Senate. We have a very special program tonight. 4 years ago, we hosted our first archival fellow, the very first historian of the U.S. Senate who retired from that role. Tonight we have an equally exciting guest. Before I introduce her, I'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors, the KU Graduate Military Programs, the KU School of Arts, Young Friends of Art at the Nelson Atkins, Spencer Museum of Art, the KU Veterans Alumni Chapter, and the University of Kansas Honors Program. I also want to say that Senior Archivist Audrey Coleman, who assumed leadership of the archival team about 1.5 years ago, who's doing a great job for us, she'll be conducting tonight's interview. And before I forget, we have a couple of staff and student workers from the archive. Hold up your hands so everybody can see who you are. Okay, there you go. There's more than a couple of you. That's awesome. That's awesome. They do a great job, and frankly, one of them slipped me $20 to do that. So, actually, I just made that up. Amy E. Herman created and conducts all sessions of The Art of Perception, a program for professionals to improve their skills of observation. Amy takes her students, among them police, first responders, FBI, Homeland Security, Army, Navy SEALs, as well as hospitals, medical schools, and trauma centers, to the Art Museum, where works of art have become the new data. Herman hones her students' powers of observation in a participatory program that trains them to communicate those observations with precision. She has a book coming out next year that we learned today has been titled Seeing What Matters. It will, like I say, be published next year. We're delighted to have her on campus and here at the Dole Institute. Please welcome Miss Amy Herman. Amy?
Thank you, Bill and Julia, for the nice introduction, and thank you all for being with us this evening. Amy, we'll just get started with the interview. You're ready?
Yes, I am.
All right, why don't we just get started with your background. Where were you educated, and how did you come to the museum field?
Well, I start by saying this, and I apologize for repeating it, but I am a recovering attorney. I am a lawyer who left practice in 1995. I have an undergraduate degree in international affairs from Lafayette College. a JD from the National Law Center, George Washington University, and a master's in art history from Hunter College of the City University of New York. And my hope is that I've been able, it sounds like a long circuitous route, that I've been able to take the practical disciplines of both the law and art history and put them together in what I hope to be a relevant and applicable professional training program.
You've mentioned that your program has its roots in medical student training. What was your inspiration and how did it come about?
Well, I'll be perfectly candid. I was the head of education at the Frick Collection for many years, and one day one of my volunteers came up to me and she said, "Did you hear what they're doing at Yale?" And I said, "No, Cynthia, what are they doing?" She said, "I have no idea, but I heard it's wonderful." So I called my colleague at Yale, who's the curator at the Yale Center for British Art, and I said, "Linda, I heard you're doing something wonderful with medical students. What is it?" And she invited me up to Yale to see the program, a collaborative program between Yale Medical School and the Yale Center for British Art. And on the train ride back from New Haven to New York, I was so impressed with the program, I thought, how can I steal this from Yale without making it look like I stole it? So with Yale's very gracious permission, I started the program at the Frick Collection with Weill Cornell Medical School. The idea of the program was very simple: to bring medical students to the art museum, to teach them to analyze works of art in the hopes of improving their observation and perception skills with their patients. It worked beautifully, and we established a number of medical collaborations with the Frick Collection.
All right, well, before we get too far into the interview, we
Yes.
definitely want you to spend some time with us, talking a little bit, showing us and demonstrating a little bit about your program. So we'll
Wonderful.
let you take it away.
All right, well, this is the fun part for me. I know it's post-dinner for a lot of you, but I'm going to put you to work. So as I make all my groups work, I'd like you to look at the slide that I've put up on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to put your right hand up in the air. Hi. And I want you to look at this slide, and when you see something absolutely definitive in this picture, I'd like you to put your hand down. Absolutely, unequivocally definitive. Okay, good, lots of hands left in the room. Now I'm going to tell you, keep those hands up if you don't see anything. Now I'm going to tell you that what's in this slide, there's a mammal in the slide. If you see a mammal, put your hand down. Keep those hands up if you don't see a mammal. Now I'm going to tell you this mammal has 4 legs. If you see a 4-legged mammal, put your hand down. Good for you with those hands still up in the room, because I was the last one up in the room. You can put your hands down now. I'm showing you another view of this slide, and what you were looking at was a cow. Did anyone in this room see a cow? Anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4. In the entire room saw a cow in this picture. Now I'm going to show you. You see it now? Sure you do. I start my program in almost every group, regardless of the profession with whom I'm working, with this exercise. Because about a year ago, I went to the Rubin Museum of Art in New York City with a colleague of mine who's head of training for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. And we went to see a man named Apollo Robbins. And for those of you who don't know who Apollo Robbins is, he's a professional con man. He can forget about the wallet in your pocket. He can take the bracelet off your wrist, the glasses off your head. You don't even know they're gone. So Apollo Robbins opened his evening with this same exercise. Let's put our hands up in the air. So my friend and I each put our hands up. And as soon as he said, put your hand down when you see something, my friend sitting right next to me put her hand down. And I'm looking, and I thought I saw a flying platypus, and I thought I saw a kitten, and I didn't see anything definitive. So my hand was still up in the air, and Robin leans over and says, "I can't believe you don't see this." And then I started to sweat, because this is what I do for a living. I help people enhance their observation skills. So I realized when the exercise was over, the very simple premise of the art of perception is that no 2 people see anything the same way, ever, regardless of your profession. So I start the program with the understanding and acknowledgement that none of us will ever see things the same way. I could look at that photograph for 6 months and never see a cow, and Robin saw it right away. So that's the underlying premise, and then we take the program from there. So I'll continue with visuals as we go through the program.
Yeah, why don't you show us some examples and kind of give us the background on how the program works.
Okay, you get to see the lovely cow again. So the title of the program is The Art of Perception, and I show you some slides of artwork. I use art, for lack of a better term, as the data with which to teach all these different professional groups. I don't talk about artist names, I don't mention years, I don't mention particular periods in art history. It's something different to look at, and the idea is to take these people from different fields, have them step away from their field for the duration of my training, so that when they go back in, the lenses through which they see their jobs will be that much cleaner, I hope. The program is not about the differences between Picasso and Pollock. That's for another day. That's for another visit to the art museum. This is about learning to look at art critically and to rethink your observation skills. And what I ask my participants to do is what the artist in this photograph did. This is a photograph by an artist named J.R. And J.R. was a wanted man in 20 countries. There was an arrest warrant out for him because he was considered a graffiti artist. So he wanted to create a self-portrait without revealing his facial identity. So what resulted was called Self-Portrait in a Woman's Eye. Rather creative. And I ask my participants to do the same thing. Don't take any pictures, don't look in anyone's eyes, but I want you to shift your perspective for my program to step away, to rethink your work, so that when you step back in, your idea of critical thinking and visual analysis will be improved. So I show you, Audrey was kind enough to share examples from the Dole archive with me, and there were so many amazing examples. And I start by showing you this wonderful portrait of the senator in his office. But what's unusual about the portrait is, I don't think the subject is the senator. He's all the way in the back. He's still a commanding figure, and yet the book and the coffee table are in the foreground, his chairs are in the background, and the senator is at his desk. I'm asking people to challenge their notions of traditional works of art to be able to articulate exactly what it is that they see. Because this is the world we live in now. We live in a world of instant information, social media, and when there's criminal activity or investigations in our world, things happen in real time. So I work with my investigators and my analysts to underscore the point that observation and perception are very important, but that effective communication of what it is that we observe is really the most important goal of the program. So those are just a couple of examples, and I will end with this one before we continue on to the next part. And I show you two portraits of a woman named Mrs. Maud Dale. And her husband, Chester Dale, was a wealthy philanthropist, and he commissioned two artists to paint portraits of his wife. And if I didn't tell you that these were portraits of the same woman, you may or may not have known. So again, we underscore, just like the cow exercise, no two people see anyone, anything, any problem, any strategy or vision the same way.
We were chatting earlier today. Why don't you tell us about some of the different organizations that you've worked with, government agencies, service groups, and things like that, and what has your experience been with those groups, and what has the outcome been, and share some details about that. It's fascinating.
It's interesting for me to think about the evolution of this program because, as I articulated to you, the program started in the medical realm, and it was not my idea. But one night, I was out to dinner with friends, and a friend said to me, "Tell me again why you're just doing this for medical students." He said, "Why don't you do it for other groups who would benefit from, better observational skills?" And I said, "Like whom?" And he said, "Like homicide detectives in a police department." And I thought that was really smart. I didn't come up with it, he did. So that was Saturday night and Monday morning. I picked up the phone and I called the New York City Police Department. And I said, "Hello, my name is Amy Herman. I'm head of education at the Frick Collection, and I have a great idea. And I want you to envision the man at the switchboard. She's too nice to hang up on, but who's going to talk to her?" 7 transfers later, I had a deputy commissioner of the New York City Police Department on the phone. And he said, "Ms. Herman, if this is so visual, why are we talking on the phone? Invite me to the Frick Collection." So he came to the Frick Collection with 7 colleagues from the New York City Police Training Academy. 6 months later, I was training every new captain in the police department. And what was wonderful about that, I loved having new audiences at the Frick Collection, but word gets out when cops start walking into the Frick Collection, and there's no heist underway. So the Wall Street Journal called and said, "We see cops are going to the Frick. What are you doing with them?" And I said, "Well, why don't you come and see?" So this lovely reporter from the Wall Street Journal came for 9 months to 9 different classes. And unbeknownst to me, she went out into New York City, onto the streets and the precincts, and she said, "How are you doing your jobs differently after learning to look at paintings at the Frick Collection?" And on July 25th, 2005, the headline on the front page of the Wall Street Journal read, "To master the art of solving crime, cops study Vermeer at the Frick." And that's when all these government agencies from all over the country, the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, and I must confess, agencies I never heard of, called me and said, "Come teach us how to see, like you do the NYPD." Isn't that a nice rhyme? And I said, "You know what, I don't teach anyone how to see. I don't know how to do that. But I can help you with the critical skills needed for observation, perception, and communication." And so from that time on, my hat is off to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the CIA. They had the vision to see that what was working for the police department in an investigative and analytical capacity easily transferred over to those agencies. And I'm so proud to say I work with 13 divisions of the police department now. I train all new surveillance agents for the FBI, and I work extensively with the CIA training new analysts. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And to think they're all looking at slides and works of art. I still haven't fully wrapped my head around it.
What was or has been the reaction from the art museum or museum community in general as your program has grown?
It's really an honor and a privilege for me to train these different groups around the country. There's an FBI field office in most states in the country, and the CIA is pretty much based in Washington, but lucky me, I get to work in museums across the country and bring what are pretty much considered to be untraditional audiences to the museums. And I would say 99.9% of the museums think of it as a win-win. We have new audiences coming in, they're looking at works of art so critically. But there is a small percentage, I will be honest with you, who just don't get it. And they can't believe that I'm using works of art with police officers, and sometimes I don't even mention the artist's name. And that's problematic for some traditional art historians, but I think the overwhelming majority of the museums with whom I have the privilege of working love the idea of bringing these audiences in and making the works of art accessible to them.
You've prepared an exercise or two to show us tonight. Do you have that?
I have,
Yeah.
I have. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give you a sample of the kind of exercise that I do, particularly with the Navy SEALs. And what I'd like you to do, I don't mean to make this social and interactive, but I'm going to make it social and interactive. And I'd like you to turn to the person next to you who's going to be your partner for this exercise. And I'm going to put a slide up. And you're going to have about 45 seconds. One of you is going to close your eyes, and one of you is going to describe the slide that I put up on the screen. And at the end of 45 seconds, I'm going to call time. And those of you who have your eyes closed are going to open your eyes, and you're going to look at the screen, and there'll be no more talking, because I'm going to address my questions to those of you who are listening with your eyes closed. But by this time, your eyes will be open, okay? So you decide with the partner next to you who's going to close his or her eyes and who's going to keep them open. All right. This is always the hardest part.
Getting organized.
All right. Okay. Are we all set? Do we all have a partner? Do we all have a partner? Yes? Okay. Now I'm going to ask those who are going to close their eyes, close your eyes now. Okay? So half the room should have his or her eyes closed. All right, I will tell you when I get to the slide. And then you will have 45 seconds. Ready? Go. Come back to it. That's okay.
You get it? Will it work over there?
I could see it. I can't answer.
I don't think so.
Hard to see.
Stop talking. Open your eyes, not another word. I'm just going to stand for 1 minute. All right, no kicking, pinching, or hitting from the describers. I'm going to ask those of you who are listening to raise your hand when you think the slide that I described is the one that was being described to you. Those of you who think the picture in the upper left-hand corner was being described to you, raise your hands. And be honest, come on, raise your hand. Upper left-hand corner. Upper right-hand corner, raise your hands. And bottom picture. Whoops. That wasn't it. This is the picture. This was the picture being described to you. Now, very briefly, for those of you who got it right, somebody tell me what the words were that were being described to them so they knew to pick the one in the upper right-hand corner. Yes. Had red in it. It was the colors. What else? Warm colors. What else? Yes?
That you felt like you were standing in the shade, but that the light was behind in the background.
That you were standing in the shade, but the light was behind you. Did anyone say to your partner it's a Monet painting? Guess what? They're all Monet. So it doesn't matter. But let me show you something without making you feel bad at all. I did this exercise with United States Navy SEALs. And if any one of you had said to your partner, there's a white border on the right side and the bottom of the picture, the game is over. The game is over. No questions asked. And as I did this exercise with the SEALs and I put the second slide up, I watched the SEAL in his chair. And he said out loud as he slumped down, I missed the border. I missed the border. Because for Navy SEALs, missing the border is a matter of life and death. You can't miss anything. And so I encourage my participants to go outside the four corners of what they're looking at and be sure to encompass all the information. Because if you notice, I didn't say, please describe the painting to your partner. I said, describe the image to your partner. So do I mince words? I do. But I encourage my participants to think about every word that they use, because in so many professions, every word counts. So that's an example of one of the exercises that I do.
Do you have another one? That was really fun.
Yeah. I do have another one.
Do it again,
yes.
do it again.
Do it again, do it again. Okay, so now, now the person who was listening is going to be the describer, okay? So what you're going to do is I want the former describers, now the listeners, to close their eyes, and they're going to perform a mental image of what is being described to them. And I'm going to give you 1 minute to describe the slide to your partner. So listeners, close your eyes. All right? 1 minute to describe the following slide. It might take me a minute to find it, not a minute. It'll take me a minute to... Ready? Go. Talk like this for 20 minutes if I want to keep going. I'm draconian when it comes to time. All right, stop. Stop. You can open your eyes. Listeners, take a look at what your describers were describing to you. Did you get a good picture in your head? So let me ask a few questions. How many of you said to your partners, there's a train coming out of a fireplace? Who said that? Raise your hand. How many of you referenced smoke or steam in your description? How many of you said to your partners, there are no tracks under this train? How many of you said there's no fire in the fireplace? Ah, good for you. How many talked about wood grain floors? What decorative arts specialists talked about wainscoting? Who talked about wainscoting? Yeah, of course. Who mentioned, he didn't know what it was, that's even better. Who mentioned a mantelpiece? Who mentioned candlesticks? And who said affirmatively there are no candles in them? Good. How many of you mentioned a mirror? And what truly observant soul said it's 12:42 or 8:05 on the clock? Who said that? So, if there's nothing else you take from my description of the art of perception, it is a concept that I introduced with this painting by Magritte called the pertinent negative. And what the pertinent negative is, when you are describing what you see, you need to describe what you don't see to give a more accurate picture of what you're looking at. So by telling me there are no tracks under a train, no fire in a fireplace, and no candles in a candlestick, by saying what isn't there, you're giving me a better picture of what is there. So you ask, well, how is this used in real life? The concept comes from emergency medicine. I had the privilege of working with emergency residents for an entire year. I learned a lot about emergency medicine, and I learned, better yet, I shouldn't be an emergency room doctor. But I learned that the pertinent negative is used when a patient comes in and is thought to have a certain condition, evidenced by 3 symptoms. Symptom A is present, symptom B is present, but if symptom C is conspicuously absent, you need to say that symptom C is absent, because then it's not the condition you thought it was. So by articulating the pertinent negative, you're being much more articulate and accurate. How else does this come into real life? In missing person cases, we have this all the time. You've heard the concept of helicopter parents. Well, we have a new one in colleges. It's called the Velcro parents. And the Velcro parents will call a resident director in a dormitory and say, you know, young Johnny hasn't been in touch with us for 24 hours. Is he safe? Can you please go into his room? So the resident director has to go into the room. What's not there? If the cell phone, the keys, and the laptop are not there, Johnny's probably fine. And last but not least, when you have an expectation of behavior, you think something is going to happen and then it doesn't, you need to say that it didn't happen. We get calls. I train child abuse investigators. And when they're called to a home to observe situations and there have been reports of certain behavior and the abuse investigator doesn't see that behavior, you need to say that it didn't happen. Not just what you observed, but what didn't. So the pertinent negative is a concept that I took from real life, brought it into the realm of art, and then we do all kinds of practical applications and use the art as a way for participants to remember how to be more descriptive and how to be better communicators.
Can you tell us about any particularly favorite, surprising, or revelatory moments you've had over the trajectory of your experience doing this work?
Yes, I've had a couple of them.
And you've been doing this for several years.
I've been doing this, which is why I'm writing a book, because I'm saving up all these experiences. But I'm going to share one of them with you, and it's in a visual context. I'm going to make the assumption, and I don't like to, that every single person in the room knows what this picture is. I was there on that day. I was in the vicinity. And I was speaking to homicide prosecutors this past January. Sharp group in New York. They are singularly credited with bringing down or raising homicide prosecutions and really bringing down the rate of homicide in New York City. And when the session was over, the head of the homicide division came running up to me and she said, I have to tell you a story. She said, I can't believe I never told this to anyone, but I'm going to tell you. She said, I live in Battery Park City, which is the residential neighborhood around the World Trade Center. And she said, the morning of 9/11, my husband and I were late for work. So we hadn't gone to work yet, and we saw what happened, and we were able to gather our 3 children in school, and they were known as the New Jersey van people. Many people in Lower Manhattan just got into vans with strangers and just drove to New Jersey just to get out. And she said she and her husband and her children were not allowed to return home for 6 weeks. Couldn't get home for 6 weeks. And they spent the entire time in each other's company in New Jersey with relatives. And her husband's cousin was the author Don DeLillo. And when the whole ordeal was over, Don DeLillo asked if he could interview both husband and wife to write an account of what happened to each of them, both on the day of the tragedy and in its aftermath. And Karen said to me that when she read the accounts of what happened on 9/11, she read her husband's account, she burst into tears, and she said, who wrote this? I was with this man 6 weeks nonstop. Everything he had said to his cousin is, I don't recognize it. I don't recognize his experience. I don't recognize his anecdotes. Nothing makes sense to me. And it made me realize again that no two people not only see things differently, they experience everything differently. And this applies to visual images. I show you this disturbing image, and yet I'm sure many of you are not familiar with this one. The title of this work of art by Rackstraw Downs is called The World Trade Center Untenanted Spaces, Winter Light, 1998. You see it now, don't you? It's an empty space in the World Trade Center. It's office space with beautiful winter light coming through the windows. It's an office building. And yet nobody ever thinks of Rackstraw Downs painting. We think of this when we see the World Trade Center. And I think about Karen and her husband and their incredibly different accounts of what happened to them that day and afterwards. How could two people be together and experience the same thing? What happens in a professional context when that happens, when a crime is committed? Or you have a surgical team and no one states out loud what the issue is, and we just go forward to solve the problem, but we never state what the problem is. Something else that happened at the Frick Collection when I was working with medical students is, I was telling Audrey this earlier today, we had a surprise loan from a donor of a dead bird. It was a painting of a dead bird, and no one really liked it. But when certain donors give you paintings, you put them on view for a little while, and everyone admires them, and then you take it down. So the dead bird was on view, and I decided to use it with my geriatric patients. And geriatric residents, excuse me. So the residents came through for their training program, and I was showing them the dead bird. And many of these residents, English was not their first language. And we were having some communication issues, and they couldn't quite see the relevance of the bird to their practice with geriatric patients. And all of a sudden, the supervisor stepped in, and she said to them, When you walk into a patient's room and the patient has passed away, before you touch them, take the pulse, and make your pronouncement, how do you know the patient is gone? And the residents, in the most articulate language I ever heard, talked about the lack of pain on the face, relaxation of the muscles, and that intangible of anxiety being gone from the room. And she turned around and pointed to the painting of the dead bird and said, "Like this beautiful bird." And it was this moment of art imitating life and life imitating art. And the connection for the residents, I could feel that it was palpable for everyone. And that made an impression on me. That was years and years ago. The dead bird has not been on view since then. But the third thing that happened so recently, and I've been talking with so many of you about this today, again, has to do with 9/11. After 9/11, the government convened a commission called the 9/11 Commission to basically ask the question, how could that happen in our country? How could something like that happen under our noses? And in 2003, the 9/11 Commission came out with its report. And what it said in summary was that the intelligence community in our country, quote, lacked imagination, collectively lacked imagination for its inability to envision that something of the scale that happened on 9/11 actually happened. So a mandate was given to the intelligence community to be more creative in its thinking and to broaden its vision of what could happen. And I don't mean in the grand scheme of 9/11, I mean in our everyday work, that everybody is encouraged to be more creative and innovative in their way of thinking about their work. And unbeknownst to me, the art of perception has been incorporated in the CIA's training as part of this mandate to augment creativity in the intelligence community. I've been teaching with the CIA for many years, but I would go to Washington, teach my session in the museum, and come home and never realized that it was part of an overarching goal for our nation to embrace creativity as part of our national security strategy. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I've brought that to nursing, and I've brought it to teaching, and I brought it to banking, because the truth is everyone needs to think more broadly. Everyone needs to think more creatively, because we do our jobs over and over again, and we get caught in a rut. Maybe you don't, but many, many people do. And I'm using art now to sharpen the edges that we have in our work to make sure that we don't lose that edge and that we all remain creative in the work that we do.
What are some of the recent or upcoming projects that you've worked with as a trainer?
Recent projects. So I started this week. This has been a particularly eventful week with, of course, the Dole Institute of Politics being the highlight of the week. This has been a really wonderful time. I started the week training nurses, trends in nursing practice. I gave a 2-hour session for palliative care and trauma nurses and hospice nurses, talking about end-of-life issues and effective communication. And what they found, I think, so rewarding is that they got to step away from nursing for 2 hours and see some images and rethink effective communication, because end-of-life communication is so, so important. And one of the nurses came up to me afterwards, and I thought what she said to me was a great title for a book. She said, "You've given me a way to look at my job through a different lens." And that's really what I'm trying to do, give people a different lens through which to see their job. And then I was in Florida. I had 3 sessions of 100 librarians. Why librarians? Why do librarians need better observation and communication skills? Because in the 21st century, as you know, as an archival institution, people are always seeking information. And libraries are not only centers for information, they're homeless drop-in centers, job training centers, language learning centers. They're more than just checking out books. And library directors have a need for increased perception and better communication with all those growing constituencies. So I trained nurses on Monday, librarians on Tuesday. I'm here for these wonderful 2 days. And Saturday, here's the weirdest one of all, I'm going to be the speaker at the NCAA conference. And you say, really? What do they want to do with art? What does the National Collegiate Athletic Association want to do with art? Their conference this year, for many reasons that you can surmise, is devoted to diversity and inclusion. And so I'm going to be their closing speaker using a number of art images to address issues of diversity and inclusion. And then next week I am back to FBI surveillance during the week, and then I have child abuse investigators the following week, and then I'm just going to rest for a couple days. So as I said, it's truly an honor for me to work across the professional spectrum, and I feel as if the infrastructure of our country is availing itself of this access to the humanities and to art, not so they can get more, not so they can be interested culturally, but so that they can do their jobs more effectively.
What do you think your program success says about the role of museum or collections-based education in the broader experience of education?
Well, I'm a little biased, having worked in the museum world for so many years, but I think that museums and cultural institutions and historical societies play such an important role, but sometimes I believe that people are intimidated to go to these institutions and to avail themselves of all the opportunities, the learning opportunities. And so what I'm hoping is that my program provides access to an untraditional audience, to make sure that going to the museum is part of your professional training when you're a New York City police officer is wonderful, but I give you a free pass to go back with 5 members of your family. And we've interviewed some of our police officers. And what warms my heart, one of the Wall Street Journal reporters asked one of the police officers, do you keep that family pass because it never expires? And he said, it's always in my wallet because I never know when I'm going to be in the neighborhood. And it's really nice to hear because cultural institutions and museums have to keep up with the digital age and providing access and information for the audiences. And to me, it's a win-win to bring in new and untraditional audiences. And I hope that my program can contribute in some small way. One other example, I'll give you, the CIA held a conference in Nebraska in April, and I was able to teach my program at the Sheldon Museum of Art on the University of Nebraska Lincoln campus. My first time there, what a treasure to the state of Nebraska. I mean, an amazing art museum. 95% of the student participants in the National Security Program had never been in the Sheldon Museum of Art. And now they're all going to go back, so they tell me. So I think our institutions are playing an ever increasingly important role, and I hope that my program can widen the access for them.
What kind of feedback do you get from the agencies that you've worked with? How are they measuring improvement or effectiveness of your program? And what kind of feedback do you, evaluation?
I always say the best feedback I get is to be invited back to do training again. And it seems to be working, and I dare say because some of my agencies are classified, the work that they do is classified, I don't really know how they use the program. I know they're using it because I keep going back and doing training for them over and over and over again. And sometimes I'll get feedback at the end of a session, a week later, a month later, or a year later from participants. I've received numerous emails from Afghanistan, from officers and soldiers who've been deployed who took my course and said, you know, this happened, this event happened. I thought of your course, I thought of what you told us to do, and in one instance I didn't do it, and I want you to share it with the classes and show them that human error does happen, but we do have control over some of the human error that can happen. And so to get individual feedback and to have my participation in the training with some of these agencies growing, I work with scientific organizations, I work in surveillance and the intelligence community, and it's gone so far beyond the arts. It's almost a unique thing for me to go and speak with art history students. So working with these agencies, it's definitely growing, and my work with hospitals has expanded in the departments that we're working with. So as I said, the best feedback I get is to keep going back to these clients over and over and over again.
How would you suggest museums and cultural heritage collections, when promoting themselves as a place of public learning, characterize themselves in their programming? Or how would you articulate the benefits to individuals or the broader society of the educational programs?
I think, as I said before, I think there's a certain level of intimidation. I think that some people are intimidated to go to cultural institutions on their own, even though there are an abundance of learning opportunities. But I think when we make opportunities available, we had a study done in New York at the Public Theater, and they wanted to know why they didn't have more diverse audiences. And they started having orientation sessions at the Public Theater. They brought people in from different neighborhoods, and they showed them where the restrooms were. They showed them where the coat check was, where you give in your tickets, and where the theater is. And attendance at the theater quadrupled in the demographics that were missing before. Because I think it's a feeling of belonging and accessibility and understanding where you're going. And watching police officers, I told the story this morning, I had a group from the Threat Assessment Unit of the NYPD a couple months ago at the Met, and you could see, I can read a skeptic a mile away. Some of them came in, their arms are crossed. What does this have to do with threat assessment? And by the end of the session, you get buttons at the Met. You put the button on your jacket. And he came up to me, one of the officers came up and he whispered, "Is this good all day? Can I stay here all day?" I said, "It would be the Met's honor, detective, to have you stay all day." So I think that cultural institutions really have to make the effort to reach out to untraditional audiences. It doesn't happen automatically. And I think social media is a good place to start, but I know a lot of my audiences aren't on social media either, so I think by creating these programs, these professional training programs that use the arts and humanities in a substantive way, I think is a good start.
Do you anticipate any situations where you might be working internationally with your program, or?
I hope so. I know my publishers hope I'll be working internationally. I have a colleague at the National Gallery of London, and she and I have been working very, very hard to come up with an analogous program for what I do with the intelligence community here with MI5 in London. It would work beautifully. The National Gallery has the perfect collections for that kind of program. But as you can imagine, bureaucracy, law enforcement, and art, it doesn't roll off the tongue. So it takes a long time, but we hope to have a number of collaborations in place in the next 18 months. I did go to Dublin. I did do the medical program at the University of Dublin, and I have done a program for Scotland Yard at the Wallace Collection. So it's a work in progress.
What would you say are the major takeaways from your program?
The major takeaways. Can I show you what the major takeaways would be? Okay. Actually, this is a major takeaway that's not in my conclusion of the program, but I'm going to sneak it in there anyway. I show you the lovely Mrs. Hannah Winthrop. I have a theme of handsome women of the 18th century in my program. So this is the first in a series of handsome women of the 18th century. The lovely Mrs. Hannah Winthrop. What do we see in her picture? We see a red and white bow in her bonnet. She's a brunette. She's got great dimples, multiple chins, a few strands of pearls, blue silk dress, incredible lace, a blue and white bow. She sits on an upholstered chair and she holds a plum in each hand. And you think, so what? What does that have to do with the intelligence community? This picture has everything to do with the intelligence community because if you look in the lower 1/4 of the painting, you will see a phenomenal mahogany table. Do you see the mahogany table? And in the reflection of the mahogany table, you can see Mrs. Winthrop's lace and her skin and her fingers and even the stem of the plum that she's holding. And what I tell my participants is, there's always something hiding in plain sight. There's always something that's right in front of your eyes that you're just not seeing. It's right there, and you're just not seeing it. So I ask them as a takeaway from my program, before you submit any report, before you finish your investigation, ask yourself, is there a mahogany table here that I've left out? And I share with you, I train executives for some corporations, and a group of hotel executives came to New York last year for a 5-day training program. Day 1 was with me, and then they continued on. And by Thursday, the facilitator called me and she said, I have to tell you, these executives have adapted the weirdest phrase. They're saying to each other, what's your mahogany table? What's your mahogany table? And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. No, they're all talking about their respective mahogany tables. So what do I want to leave you with? You see, I have so many images. We start with blah, blah, blah. You've been with me for hours. As I say to the participants, what are you going to take away? First and foremost, assess the big picture. Look at the big picture. We see a barmaid standing behind the bar, and don't forget to ask any questions that don't make sense. Is that a mirror behind her? Is that her backside? Is that another barmaid's backside? Who's the client? But while you're assessing the big picture and asking all those questions, don't forget the small details, because in the upper left-hand corner, there's a trapeze artist up there. That's why everyone's gathered, to see the entertainment. Don't forget the small details, because small details solve big crimes. Don't ever forget to say, as similar as two investigations cases patients might be, you need to state out loud that one's a painting, one's a photograph. Because in our world of texting and emailing, you can see something, but if you don't state your vantage point and your perspective, someone on the other end of that email isn't going to see that one's a painting, one's a photograph. And you need to say that the people in the top picture, you're seeing them from the back, and the people in the painting you're seeing in profile. As you can see, nothing that I'm teaching is complicated. It's not rocket science, but we so easily forego the foundation of information that we need to convey and want to rush in for the big picture and the complex information. Second guess all your decisions. Ask yourself, are there mahogany tables? Did I communicate this as effectively as possible? Did I use the most concise and articulate language in what I'm conveying? And I show you this wonderful sculpture by an artist, El Anatsui, and I advocate what the CIA has told me to do. creativity and resourcefulness in all lines of work. Elan Atsui is a contemporary sculptor. And what he does is he creates, you can see the scale of his work of art. He gathers the material for his sculptures from discarded, flattened, hammered bottle caps found at a distillery near his home. Look what he does. Talk about creativity and resourcefulness. And they ask him, well, you could use gold and silver, you have the resources. He said, no, I need to be creative. I want to use materials that have been discarded by other people. Creativity and resourcefulness, and this wonderful shot of the senator. It reminds us all to keep a sense of humor in everything we do. Because no matter how serious your profession, you need to have a sense of humor. It brings humanity back to the workplace. Not to be afraid of complicated situations. Now I'm going to describe this work of art to you. There's an artist named Lou Bolin, and what Lou Bolin does is he paints himself into photographs of his own work. But this is a collaborative work of JR, the man who took a picture of himself in a woman's eye, and Lou Bolin. And Lou Bolin has painted JR. Do you see JR painted into the center of the photograph? Lou Bolin has painted JR into a photograph of Lou Bolin looking from his eye out of two fingers, and the entire photograph is superimposed on the door of JR's studio. Don't be afraid of complexity. If you can explain things one sentence at a time, all problems can be explained with effective communication. At the end of every day, everyone in my class has to look in the mirror. They're not going to see this. But you need to look in the mirror at the end of every day, ask yourself what you did right, what you did wrong, and how you're going to fix what you did wrong. You're going to learn from it, and most importantly, you're going to move on. And last but not least, we can't forget that observation, perception, and communication skills are a work in progress, always. Nobody masters them, which is what's keeping me in business. Nobody masters them, and we have exercises and things, and that's why I'm using art to practice these skills over and over again. And I leave you with two slides that I hope give you a visual illustration of life before the art of perception and afterwards. That's my website, which explains the training that I do. And these are portraits of the 20th and 21st century portrait painter Chuck Close. Many of you may be familiar with Chuck Close. He's paralyzed from the shoulders down, and yet he's this incredible portrait painter. And the portrait on the left from 1995, it's pretty straightforward. It's a white man, he's bald, he's got blue-green eyes, round glasses, a goatee, and a t-shirt, and he's looking right out at us. There's nothing wrong with seeing the world this way. But I want my participants to see the world the way Chuck Close saw his self-portrait on the right side. He's taken every quadrant of information and he's broken it down and made it more colorful, more interesting, and more compelling without sacrificing the big picture. And he's even lowered his glasses to make sure he gets the big picture without forsaking the small details. And I tell my classes that if you look at the world this way and use all the information available to you, not only will it improve your visual acuity and your professional objectives and your ability to do your job, I think it makes you a more interesting person. And the last story that I'll leave you with related to these slides is when my son was in elementary school, I'm not in town very often, but I love to take him to school. It's our morning time together. And I would drop him at his school in the West Village. And I would jog home to get some exercise on 12th Street to get home to the east side. And one day a man was coming out of his building in a wheelchair. And he had a rope tied around his rib cage. And he was walking a big Labrador retriever. And I happen to love Labrador retrievers. But in New York, you have to ask permission to pet someone's dog. So I said to the man in the wheelchair, "May I pet your dog?" And he said, "Of course." I got down on the ground and I got drool all over me. My hair was a mess. Stood up, cleaned myself off, thanked the man very much. And as he wheeled towards 6th Avenue and I walked towards 5th, I realized the man in the wheelchair was Chuck Close. I was so focused on his big hairy dog that I didn't realize that one of my favorite artists in the whole world was sitting in the wheelchair in front of me. So I tell my classes, look at the world around you, that there's a lot that we're missing. So those are some visual examples from my takeaways.
All right. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you.
We've got some time for questions, and so we'd like to open it up to the audience. We have a couple of students out there with microphones. You'll want to speak into the microphone so we can get that, so we can all hear and also get it on our videotape.
And before anyone asks, no, I never saw Chuck Close again. I walked that street the rest of the school year. I never saw him again, so in case you wanted to ask.
And stand up, too, please, when you ask your question.
Do you think your program could be applicable to politicians? And if so, what might it look like?
It's a great question. But I dare say I've thought of it as well, and I approached the Congressional Foundation in Washington in an effort to bring the program to freshman congressmen. I thought, who needs more effective communication than freshman congressmen? And the first response I got, and if you think of some of who my clients are, the woman at the Congressional Foundation said to me, "Well, our congressmen are very busy." Yes, I know. I know they're very busy, but I think it might be time well invested and explain the importance of effective communication, especially when we're dealing with constituents and we're dealing with legislation. And we went back and forth, and it didn't make the cut this year for programming. I know they offer yoga to the freshman congressman, which she shared with me, but I hope springs eternal that I'm going to be able to get the program. I'm in Washington so often, and I think for Congress, especially in the troubled times that we're in now, thinking about effective communication, or I should say rethinking communication, could only be of help, I hope. So my fingers are crossed. I'm on it. Any other questions?
Yes, so you mentioned that you work with different museums, all different sorts of museums, not just art museums.
Yes.
How do you come at this with, say, a historical society or a natural history museum? How do you use these techniques in those different settings?
I will say the majority of the museums that, with whom I work are visual art museums. But sometimes I go to small cities and towns where the historical collection or the natural history museum is really the premier institution to use. So again, woe's me, I have to spend so much time in all these wonderful cultural institutions. So I spend time with the curators walking through the collections and deciding what would be conducive to good dialogue and conversation and what's going to offer varying viewpoints. And so it's really a matter of working with the objects. I worked with auditors in the state of New York. And we worked in a historical museum in upstate New York that I had never heard of. But we spent the time, we were talking about fraudulent documentation, which was the focus of the program. And so it's a matter of working with the curators, rethinking much of what I did with Audrey when we first started talking about this collaboration, because this is an archive. And how can we use an archive to rethink our approach to observation, perception, and communication? And then she sent me these fabulous examples, that some of which you saw tonight and some that I'm going to use tomorrow in my program, that offer us an opportunity to rethink the context of history. So it's not just about the creation of visual art, but we can use documents and we can use archives and we can use objects of natural history. I just have to put a little spin, a different kind of spin on it.
Thank you for coming. Do you ever train other people to do what you do, such as the police captains to train other police officers?
I'll tell you, one of the benefits of working so closely with the police department, I've become friends with so many of them, and one of my favorite captains retired. And when I went to wish him well and thank him for participating in my programs over the years, he said to me in the inimitable words, because we had this very same discussion, he said, "Miss Herman, ain't nobody gonna be you." And I said, what does that mean? And I realized, I don't train other people. I'd rather sacrifice the growth of my company to be able to do the training myself, because so much of what I teach is my experience with all of these groups. And one training session informs the next and informs the next. So many of my anecdotes come from feedback and comments and insights, that it's not just the law degree and the art history degree. Those are academic. Anyone can do those. But I've had this privilege and honor to work with so many professional groups that I'm not sure I could ever actually teach someone to do this. So right now, it's just me, a lot of gray hairs and a lot of travel. But that's, I think, the way it's going to stay for a while.
Thank you for coming. Have you had any experience with conflicts among people's perceptions? And if so, how do you reconcile them?
You know, it really makes, well, first of all, you're welcome. It's an honor to be here. And I think conflicts make for the most spirited discussions, because dissension happens in the workplace. And I find it less threatening, more fun, and diffused to talk about those conflicts in the context of art. And the example that I'll give you, let me put an image up on the screen to give you an example. I'll put this up, and I'll say, okay, what do you see? And someone will say, his wife threw him out. And I'll say, no, that's not what you see, that's what you think. Tell me what you see. And someone will say, well, there's, a man with curly hair, he's white, a pink shirt, obnoxiously short blue shorts, sneakers, and I'll say, well, where is he? And someone will say, oh, he's at an airport. And someone else will say, how do you know he's at an airport? You don't see any travelers. You don't see airplanes, and someone else will say, well, institutional carpeting, he's got bags, and we'll have this whole discussion, and the disagreement, they form their own dialogue, and we go back and forth. How did you miss this? No, I don't see that. And I don't leave the picture until we've come to some kind of consensus or an agreement to disagree. But what I will tell you about this picture is the reason I use it, if you notice in the upper left and upper right-hand corners, there are flashbulbs. You know why they're flashbulbs? Because he's made of wax and resin. He's a work of art. His name is Man in an Airport by Dwayne Hansen. He's a sculpture. And I use it to illustrate the point that no matter what observation, perception, and communication skills, however good we are, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be dead wrong sometimes. This is not a real man. It's a sculpture. But I will also tell you that when I was at the Manhattan DA's training office doing my training, and I put this up as the last slide, and I said, okay, who's going to tell me what they see? And this young, earnest, newly minted prosecutor raised his hand and he said, it's a sculpture of a man on the floor of the Orlando airport by Dwayne Hansen. And I looked at him and I said, you really know how to take the wind out of someone's sails, don't you? And I said, how do you know that? And with the utmost of pride and the straightest posture I've ever seen, the young man sat up and he said, Dwayne Hansen was my father. Dwayne Hansen, next to Chuck Close, is one of my favorite artists in the whole world. And not only have Dwayne Hansen Jr. and I become friends, he told me the great story that when he was a child, people in the Orlando airport used to get so annoyed that this man was allowed to sleep on the floor that they'd throw pennies at him to wake him up and it would chip the paint. And it was always being shipped home for his father to fix. So I encourage dissent, I encourage conflict. I have a thick skin. I've never had to pull anyone apart. But I always believe if we can get those conflicting feelings out in my sessions, they'll be better equipped to deal with them on the job. Anything else?
Any other questions?
I think there's one.
We all really enjoy you being here tonight.
Thank you.
The picture you had up of the Twin Towers,
I can put it back up for you. You can see how many slides I didn't show you. Yes,
they're different.
the towers?
The image down here
Yes.
and the image up on the screen.
That could be distortion of the screen.
Yeah, it's distortion, which is a perception.
Yes, it is. You're absolutely right.
So my question is this going to be Pavlovian for World War III? What I mean is this image really does stir some emotion.
Yes, it does. And that's why I
But
use
when
it.
that image is distorted, are we changed too?
It's a good question. And what you're asking underscores a very important point of my program, is I ask people never to underestimate the power of a visual image. There's a reason newspapers sell. There's a reason certain pictures. I read 4 newspapers a day. Not only do I have to keep abreast of major criminal investigations that are happening in the cities in which I do work and with the police departments, but I also want to read where communications are a problem. And I'm always drawn to the visual images. I take so many of my photojournalistic images from the paper. I want to show you something like this. Very evocative of human emotion because they're conducive to good dialogue. But I remind people not only is art such a powerful visual image, but so is photography, and so is photojournalism, and that we have to remember what we see isn't always what's there, which is your point about the distortion. I think it's your point about the distortion, that these images are very powerful and that we have to keep in check how powerful they are. I feel like I'm exploiting the power to use them as a training vehicle, but I also want them to walk away remembering how powerful visual images in our everyday lives really can be. Anything else? About anything?
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you
Amy
very much.
Herman.
Thank you.